This is Danny Glover. Find my interview with Pascal Archimed on No Fee, First on Black Culture.
Good morning, Danny Glover.
Good morning.
It's a real pleasure, brother, to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You are an African-American actor, film director, civil rights activist, as well as a political activist. Born in San Francisco, your two parents were active in the NAACP. Tell us more about your childhood and what impact did the environment you grew up in have on your adult life and on your career?
Well, I just started off as an actor, first of all. But I've always felt that I was going to be, as a young boy, influenced by the civil rights movement. I felt that I was going to be in my profession, or whatever I did, was as a profession of service in some sense. Whether I've been a teacher, or whether I would have been a social worker, or some sort of someone who worked in a public space. In fact, I worked for 7 years for the city and county of San Francisco, 6.5 years, for the city and county of San Francisco in the Office of Community Development. So I started off in community development. So the idea of being an actor wasn't initially what I thought my profession was going to be. Okay. Consequently, I think because a part of my life, the early part of my life, adult life, was in community service and community development, I learned so much and gained a lot of respect for the people who are advocates, ordinary citizens who are advocates within their communities, and who try to transform and change their communities. So that's the first thing that I would have to say, just thinking about it right now. The idea of being around men and women who use their power, men and women who use their power to transform and make their communities better.
Okay. But how did you come to the film industry? How did you end up in the film industry?
Well, I began as an actor on stage, and at a very interesting point, I think in the history of Black theater through the 20th century, and my involvement became initially in the last part of the 20th century, in the late 60s, and there was a great movement around Black arts. And now we know about those movements around artists, whether it was the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, or it was the movement around Negritude in French countries, Martinique. Two people, Leopold Senghor and Émile Césaire, were leaders in those particular movements. But this movement came out of particularly the idea around using art as a framework to build another consciousness of ourselves, and in this sense, what I want to say, a revolutionary consciousness of ourselves. So what was happening in that particular moment, right after the Civil Rights Movement, probably the Free Southern Theater Company was one of many theater companies that embraced the idea of revolutionary art, or Black art.
Okay.
Amiri Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones, one of the great proponents of that.
Definitely.
Amiri Baraka came out to my school for a semester at San Francisco State University in the spring of 1967. And that was the first time I was a student there, and I was involved with the Black Student Union. And that was the first time that I'd ever been on a stage when Amiri came out there. so all those are things that, in some sense, bring me the early nurturing. I had never considered acting at all. It wasn't something that I thought about as a child, as perhaps a professional. Uh, but that those circumstances at that particular moment with the Black Arts Movement and involved the student activists there, the two things seemed to resonate with me.
Okay.
And so even though I studied economics and worked in communities development, worked in urban development, everything else, there was still this passion for Black art.
Okay, exactly what you mean. And as we speak about films, what criteria do you take into consideration to accept a film role?
I mean, there are many criteria. Actors like to work. You show me an actor who doesn't want to work, and it's so hard to work. Basically, I'm gonna look at the film and see if there's if it's something I want to do. There are different criteria in terms of that. I was fortunate in my early career that I was able to do films that in some typified what I thought were the kind of films I'm going to do throughout my career.
Okay.
If you look at my first three major roles, one was in Places in the Heart with Sally Fields, Witness with Harrison Ford, a Peter Weir film, and The Color Purple.
Yep.
Which we all
that
know.
We're going to speak about. That's going to be my next question. Okay.
And Silverado, a very wonderful Western. And then of course the Lethal Weapon series. So it began that, so the kind of films that some films are going to be made. Choices are made about films. The studio says, I want to do this film.
Okay.
And I was just in that position in my career where I was one of the actors that perhaps they were considering for that film. Each time, the director says whether the director through audition or the director who sees you in something else. And wants you to do that. That happens early in your career. And I think so. For me, it happened relatively soon after I decided I was going to be an actor. And when I decided I was going to be an actor, I was 30 years old.
Okay, all right. Because, Danny, as you were speaking about The Color Purple, for many people, you will be remembered for the evil that you embodied as Miss Star. In this movie, released in 1985. So what challenges did you face when portraying such a character?
I don't know where, when you say challenges, actors don't make a judgment on the behavior of their character. They don't determine whether the character is a bad guy, is a good guy, with everything else. An actor finds somewhere internally or expresses somewhere what his needs are. And his behavior is a response to a simple question: what do I want?
Okay.
I don't right now. If I begin to become judgmental about the character, then there's no way in which I can find my way and immerse myself in the character. So for me, I try to create the relationships within himself and outside himself that bring about the response, his behavioral response. And certainly that's dictated by a lot of things, by the social context and historical context of the film. All those things in a sense, and the authority that he may think that he has, all those things are person things, things that happen within the character's sense of himself, the sense of entitlement, et cetera. So I don't think about that. What I try to find out in the film, since it's a film about transformation, it was a film about healing. In some ways, when you, as an actor, you look at the story and figure out what your relationship to all the characters are.
Okay. All right.
What's your relationships? One, I have my father in it, you know, who's a patriarch. I come from a very patriarchal line. It's the opposite of what I come from in my real life, because I come from a very, very strong matriarchal line. And so and then I have this kind of relationship. So that's the craft of an actor, you know. If I'm playing Macbeth, I'm trying to figure out. What is Beth? What is it that he wants? You know, just at the same time I'm playing Mister, and they're human traits. You know, I mean, they're human things that people want. You know, on the one hand, you know, you can make a choice that Macbeth wants the admiration of Lady Macbeth, or to feel that its power comes through the power that she, the way in which she controls his life, and he wants her. You make those choices in the process of doing it. So the language, if he's deciding this, whether he wants to kill the king, if it were done when 'tis done, then well, it were done quickly. If the assassination could trample up the consequence and catch with his success, that with this blow might be the be all and end all here, but here upon this bank in shoal of time, we jump the life to come. He said, if I do it, whatever it is, I do it, I would have done something. I would become the king. And he said, so it's all those things about it. So he sits down there and he figures out, he's probably sitting on his toilet, his royal toilet, or his toilet, Dana Caldor toilet, and trying to figure out what it means to kill the king.
Exactly, I see exactly what you mean. But you know what? Because
but that's where do you have your most private moment? Where do you have your most private moment?
What you were saying, what you were talking about in front on my toilets, just like you said, you see what I mean? But you know what? Because in addition to being an actor, you're also the co-founder and CEO of L'Ouverture Film, which is a company that produces independent films. So why did you choose to name your company after Toussaint Louverture, this Haitian hero who allowed Haiti to become the first Black republic in the world?
First of all, Louverture means the opening.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Because I know exactly what you mean.
And so it's basically that. And I'm a Haitian at heart.
Okay.
You know, I'm a Haitian that I think it's the greatest revolution that took place at the end of the 18th century. Out of the three revolutions, it was the Haitian Revolution with two things. It was the first defeat of the worldwide institution of slavery, the Haitian Revolution. I read that. Feel that. That's why it is understanding history. And one of the what's called, it was that's what Haiti represent. It represented this ray of hope everywhere in Latin America. You know, whether it was Simon Boulevard, who got money from and provisions for André Pétion, who was the president of Haiti at the time, in order to go liberate South America. So the Haitian Revolution, I think, is the most important revolution in that particular point. It was the first victory against slavery, against the institution of slavery. And it's the only time that it ever happened in human history that a slavery vote actually won. Now, what we should be doing, if our children around the world understood that and knew that, and they carried that around as their armor, as their protection of themselves is their sense of themselves, in the sense that I'm that. That's my experience.
Yep.
That's my experience. That's my human experience as not only as a man of African descent, a person of African descent, but also humanity. If, in a sense, this revolt defeated the most powerful army in the world at the time, Napoleon's army, of slave revolt, and freed them, no, in an attempt that happened, the attempt was to re-enslave them. That's what the attempt was, to re-enslave them.
Yeah.
And they fought against that. Of course, you're not going to be teach that. The empire's not going to teach those kind of stories.
I know.
The empire's not going to tell you this kind of story. But you're walking around it. Ntozake Shange wrote a beautiful poem in it for Color Girls about Toussaint, the little boy that she met when she was a little girl, and his name was Toussaint. It's a beautiful part of her for Color Girls, play, and she dreamed of him as that same Toussaint that liberated Haiti and the Haitian people. Come on, so it's obvious, you know. That's why we said not only opening, but also it is in honor of the rebellion and the Haitian rebellion that took place, that created the first Black country, African descendant country in the hemisphere.
Yeah, 100%.
Free African.
In 2019, Tyler Perry opened his own studio lot in Atlanta on a former Confederate Army base. What do you think about this initiative, and why is Black ownership important?
I think it is important. I think we have to have control of our own cultural production. We also have to say, okay, what kind of cultural production do we want to engage ourselves in? Okay. You know, that's not only just to have it there. What kind of cultural production? What do we learn about ourselves? And the question, I don't know too much about what his venture is, but the question is, what does it teach us? You know, what do we learn about ourselves? How do we say, you know, there's you know, you have a situation now in terms of, is it simply to entertain people? What we do in cultural production? Well, playing football entertains people. But the fact that the people who perform the action playing American football are people who come from Black community. 70% of them come from are Black, so they come from their own community, and they have to deal with the real world as well. The real world that they live in, juxtaposed to the world that they grew up in, and the world that probably the majority of their families lived in. Oh, so what is the question is about is important. I think it's the idea of the problem with this whole thing is that even though you have your own studio, I don't know how much control you have over what you produce.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, absolute control over what you produce. What determines that? You know, what are the determinants? What are the determinants? And I'm just knowing nothing about it really, about the production company. I'm just in a very little amount of acceptance, announcement and everything else. And I'm just wondering where we are now, what impact that he has. Is he going to be the arbitrator for what is considered Black films or Black culture production? I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what his suit. Does he become the single one? Should be a diversity in the process of what's being made, you know? Or is he the one that we say, oh, take it to Tyler Perry if you want to do this, or take it to this if you want to do this. You know, the culture production that we do is you can look at our agenda in literature film. Some of the things we do, we've done. It could be a film that we were involved in, a foreign film, and from Lebanese film with a wonderful Lebanese director, called Caperna about a young boy. It could be a film. We produced a Palestinian film by Anna Marie Jasur, and we would been involved in a film by Apachal Pong. We called him Joe, who's a director from Thailand. So I think about world cinema in a sense. And that's the kind of world cinema. We were involved in a film called Zama, about a short story about a book, an important novel in Latin America.
Yeah.
We are interested in doing a film that around what was the Bedouin community like before oil was discovered in the Bedouin community in the Middle East. So there are different other kind of ways in which you look at it. We produced a film by extraordinary filmmaker Adir Rahman Sissako about the African debt crisis called Bamako. That was one of our first films we produced 12 years ago. So it depends upon what you want to do.
Yeah,
how you
definitely.
want to do that.
I see what you mean.
So we would have said, yeah, and you know that Trouble the Water documentary that we produced. Also, we were producers on a film called Strong Island, which was nominated for an Oscar. We've had we have 3 film documentaries that have been nominated for an Oscar. So I'm in the culture production, you know, and there were several things on our slates that I find fascinating and understand, you know.
I see what you mean.
And then connecting the dots, you know. And there's always connecting the dots. You're connecting the historical dots. When we talk about this country, there were before there were First Nation people here, and the world was a different world before 1492. You know, when Columbus, the world was a different world. You know, in fact, there were empires like the Moors were in Spain for 700 years. You know, the Ottoman Empire was around for 5,000. The Ottoman Empire, and these empires were just as powerful as any of the European empires of their particular moment. In fact, they may have been more dominant.
And I wanted to ask you something, Danny. Some media say that worldwide demonstrations following George Floyd's murder had never happened since the 1960s. What does Danny Glover, the civil rights activist, think about this opinion?
Well, it depends upon how you have the information. What you have now during the civil rights movement. Of course, you had support from different Scandinavian countries. Harry Belafonte and Dr. Martin Luther King was able to raise money overseas from the King of Sweden. There were other kind of ways in which they raised money internationally. The civil rights movement had an impact within the framework of other movements too. If you look at the movements against the newly installed apartheid system in 1952, the campaign against unjust laws were at the same time that African Americans, a short time after that, is in South Africa. There were movements there in the United States against discrimination. The campaign against unjust laws, which Mandela took part in 1952, the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955. There's a demonstration boycott of that, the same thing, and the Brown versus Board of Education, which allowed us to integrate schools. So all these kind of movements, they're interrelated. In fact, I remember having a conversation with Walter Sisulu at his home in Soweto, and he talked about intellectuals that came to South Africa, African Americans who intellectuals came to South Africa in the 30s, and they discussed things. Or the beginning thing, you look at the African Methodist Church, an abolitionist church. African American ministers, the AME was reporting to Congress, testifying Congress in the last part of the 19th century on the slavery that was happening in Africa. So these kind of movements that are happening, we designate this moment as a movement, you know, but these movements are happening all the time. Who was at the Manchester Conference in 1945? Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois. Who was also there? Kwame Nkrumah, the first President of Westcom. There were leaders from the Caribbean who would go on to lead their countries to independence, leaders from other African countries that began to lead their countries to independence as well. So all these movements, and defining the movement as a particular moment is also maybe the wrong way in which we look at movement. I mean, did African Americans start the civil rights movement before 1954, Brown versus Board of Education? Absolutely not. Okay. They were struggling all through. When was there was the anti-lynching campaign that Ida B. Wells led in 1896. And then the anti-lynching campaign that they were organizing in 1946, which is the year I was born. And who was the head of that anti-lynching campaign? Who were the co-chairs of the anti-lynching campaign? Paul Robeson and Albert Einstein. So there are movements that are happening all the time. It's just that happens, a particular action happened, and the action that happened brought about Brown versus the Board of Education, and it opened up the space to desegregate this stuff, to get rid of de jure segregation.
Okay, Danny, one last question. So Danny Glover is the actor, the film director, the civil rights activist. What's the next step? Do you have some projects you would like to talk about?
Not really. I mean, I don't have the projects that I think about, but I became Danny Glover, the citizen.
Okay, all right. I love it. So,
citizen Danny Glover.
Okay, all right. So thank you, brother, for this interview.
All right.
And I wish you all the best for the rest of your journey, because I know you still have a long journey to come.
Well, we'll see.